The winter night was bitter cold when the stars above Montana's Bitterroot Range began to shimmer with unusual intensity. Former Special Forces Captain Jake Thorne stood on his cabin porch, coffee mug warming his calloused hands as he watched a streak of light tear across the sky. His military instincts, never fully dormant, immediately registered that this was no ordinary meteor. The object changed course twice before disappearing behind the tree line 2 miles east. A dull thud echoed through the valley moments later. "Definitely not a meteor," Jake murmured, already heading inside for his gear. 20 minutes later, he approached the crash site cautiously, thermal scope scanning for movement. The small craft had carved a trench through the snow-covered forest, its metallic hull gleaming with an iridescent purple that seemed to pulse beneath the surface. Jake circled the vessel once, noting its unusual egg-like shape. No visible propulsion system, no weapons he could identify. As he completed his sweep, a seam appeared in the smooth exterior, widening into a doorway from which a soft blue light emanated. He raised his rifle instinctively, then froze as a figure emerged. She was humanoid but unmistakably alien. Tall and slender with silvery blue skin that reflected the moonlight like rippling water. Her eyes were large, completely black except for specks of light that resembled stars. Long, delicate fingers curled protectively around her swollen abdomen. She was pregnant. "Captain Jacob Thorne," she said, her voice melodic but strained. "I've traveled very far to find you." Jake kept his rifle raised. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" "I am Alara, of the celestial hierarchy of Andromeda." She took a tentative step forward, wincing. "Please, I mean no harm. I need your help." "Stay where you are," Jake warned, though his curiosity was winning over caution. "Why me? There are plenty of soldiers in this world." Alara's star-filled eyes seemed to search his face. "Not like you. Your genetic profile was identified as compatible with our needs." She swayed slightly, one hand bracing against the hull of her craft. Despite his better judgment, Jake lowered his weapon slightly. "You're injured." "The journey was difficult. My ship sustained damage evading the Sentinel drones." Her hand caressed her abdomen. "We both need sanctuary." "Both?" Jake's eyes narrowed. "You and my child." Alara's voice softened. "They will come for us. The Sentinels. They believe my child represents a threat to our established order." "And does it?" Jake asked bluntly. A smile touched Alara's lips. "All new life represents change. Whether that change is threatening depends on who stands to lose power." Jake considered his options. Every instinct screamed this was beyond his pay grade, that he should call someone, except there was no one to call anymore. Not since his dishonorable discharge 3 years ago after the classified incident in Qatar. "Why should I help you?" he finally asked. "Because you already have," Alara replied cryptically. She stepped fully into the moonlight, and Jake noticed the intricate markings across her shoulders and arms, patterns that seemed oddly familiar. Before he could question her further, Alara gasped and doubled over. Something was wrong with the pregnancy. "Please," she whispered, reaching toward him. "There isn't much time." Jake hesitated only a moment longer before slinging his rifle and moving to support her weight against him. Her skin was warm, almost feverishly so, and felt like velvet beneath his touch. "My cabin's not far," he said gruffly. "Can you walk?" Alara nodded, leaning into his strength. "Thank you, Jacob." "Jake," he corrected automatically. "Nobody calls me Jacob except your mother," Alara finished. "I know." Jake stiffened but kept moving, guiding her through the snow-covered forest toward his cabin. "You're going to tell me exactly how you know so much about me once we get somewhere warm. And who exactly fathered that child you're carrying?" Alara's hand tightened on his arm. "Some truths require time," Jake Thorne. And trust. As they made their slow way through the forest, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just irrevocably changed. The stars above seemed to watch their progress, silent witnesses to an encounter that would bridge two worlds. Behind them, Alara's ship hummed softly, its surface beginning to shift and change, camouflaging itself among the trees and snow, hiding from the hunters that would surely follow. The cabin's warmth enveloped them as Jake helped Alara through the door. Her breathing had steadied during their trek, but exhaustion lined her otherworldly features. Jake guided her to the worn leather couch before stoking the fire to a roaring blaze. "You should rest," he said, watching as she adjusted herself, one hand constantly protective over her rounded abdomen. "Thank you." Alara's eyes swept the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the tactical gear organized with military precision, and the photographs, few but meaningful, arranged on a shelf. "You live alone. Isolated. By choice." Jake grabbed a blanket from a nearby chair and offered it to her. "Not looking for psychoanalysis from an alien, thanks. An observation, not judgment." Alara accepted the blanket, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent an electric current through him, not unpleasant, but startling. "Forgive me. My species communicates partially through touch. I should have warned you." "What was that?" Jake stepped back, suddenly wary again. "A connection. Nothing invasive." She arranged the blanket over her legs. "My people, the Andromedan Celestials, are empathic. Touch allows for deeper understanding." Jake moved to the kitchen area, keeping her in his sight as he filled a kettle. "So you're reading my mind?" "No. Emotions primarily. Surface thoughts occasionally, but only with sustained contact." She tilted her head. "You've experienced something similar before." The kettle nearly slipped from Jake's grasp. "The classified Qatar incident, the strange lights in the desert, the missing hours, the reason for his discharge." "How do you know about that?" "Because it wasn't Qatar," Alara said softly. "It was a research vessel from my world. A first contact mission that didn't follow protocols." Jake set the kettle down hard. "They took me. For 3 days. That's what really happened, isn't it? Not the hallucination story the military fed me." "Yes. I was not part of that mission," Alara clarified, "but I accessed the records. They were interested in human genetic diversity. Your particular genetic makeup showed extraordinary adaptability. They experimented on me. It wasn't a question. They collected samples. It was unauthorized. The mission leader was severely punished." Alara's expression conveyed genuine regret. "My government officially denied any contact. Your military created a cover story to prevent panic." Jake poured hot water into 2 mugs, adding tea bags mechanically while processing this information. "And now you're here, pregnant, looking specifically for me. Pretty big coincidence." "Not coincidence." Alara accepted the mug he offered, careful not to touch his fingers this time. The mission had unforeseen consequences. Political factions formed. Some believed contact with humans should continue. Others felt threatened. "Which side are you on?" "I was chief geneticist for the Progressive Coalition." She sipped the tea cautiously. "We advocated for open communication with Earth." "Was?" "Until I became pregnant." Her star-filled eyes met his. "My pregnancy represents something forbidden, proof that our species could potentially intermingle. The Sentinels, our military authority, see this as a threat to genetic purity." Jake sat across from her, tension visible in every line of his body. "You still haven't told me who the father is." Alara's hand moved over her belly in slow circles. "That's complicated. And part of why I sought you specifically. Before she could continue, a low hum emanated from a device attached to her wrist. Ilara's expression shifted to alarm. "They've tracked my ship faster than I anticipated." She struggled to stand. "We need to move the vessel. Its energy signature will lead them directly here." "Whoa, easy." Jake helped her up. "Who exactly is they?" "The Sentinel Advanced Scouts. They're designed to retrieve or destroy evidence of unauthorized contact." She gripped his arm urgently. "Your weapons won't affect them. The ship has defensive capabilities, but I need to activate them remotely." Jake considered his options. Every instinct told him he was getting pulled into something dangerous, potentially catastrophic. Yet looking at Ilara, vulnerable yet determined, he couldn't bring himself to turn away. "What do you need me to do?" Ilara's relief was palpable. "Help me reach these coordinates." She showed him a map on her wrist device. "From there, I can redirect my ship's camouflage protocols and scatter false signals." Outside, snow had begun falling heavily, transforming the forest into a white labyrinth. Jake grabbed his cold weather gear and combat pack. "We move fast, stay quiet," he instructed, helping Ilara into a spare parka that dwarfed her slender frame. "How mobile are you in your condition?" "More capable than I appear," she assured him, though concern shadowed her features. Jake, you should know. Once you help me with this, you'll be involved. The Sentinels will consider you a collaborator. Wouldn't be the first time I've been on someone's hit list." Jake checked his rifle out of habit, then remembered her words about its uselessness against their pursuers. "Any suggestions for defense?" Ilara removed a small device from her belt, resembling a silver disc. "This disrupts their neural network. Limited range, but effective." As they prepared to venture into the storm, Jake found himself studying Ilara's profile, the graceful curve of her neck, the determined set of her jaw, the protective way she carried her unborn child. Something about her stirred emotions he'd thought long buried after years of isolation. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "Really?" Ilara paused at the door, snowflakes already settling on her silvery blue skin like tiny stars. "Because you've seen my world before, even if you don't remember it fully. And because..." She hesitated, "Some connections transcend understanding. You'll know soon enough." With that cryptic answer hanging between them, they stepped into the swirling snow, two disparate beings united by circumstances neither fully comprehended. Above them, through breaks in the clouds, the stars of Andromeda glimmered faintly, distant witnesses to an alliance that would challenge the boundaries of two worlds. The forest had transformed into a swirling white void as Jake and Ilara trudged through knee-deep snow. Their breath crystallized in the freezing air while Jake constantly scanned their surroundings, hyper-alert for any sign of pursuit. "How much further?" he asked, supporting Ilara over a fallen log. Despite her assurance of capability, the journey was clearly taxing her in her condition. "Just beyond that ridge," she replied, gesturing toward a rocky outcropping barely visible through the snowfall. "From there, I can establish a secure connection to my ship's systems." As they crested the ridge, Ilara suddenly tensed, her hand gripping Jake's arm with surprising strength. "Down!" Jake reacted instantly, pulling them both into the snow as a faint humming sound passed overhead. Through the falling snow, he glimpsed a metallic object, roughly the size of a basketball but with spindly appendages that reminded him of insects, hovering 30 feet away. "Sentinel drone," Ilara whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "Reconnaissance model. It's scanning for biosignatures." They remained motionless as the drone executed a methodical search pattern. Jake felt Ilara trembling against him, whether from cold or fear he couldn't tell. Her hand remained protectively curved around her abdomen. After an agonizing minute, the drone changed direction and moved away from their position. Jake waited another full minute before helping Ilara to her feet. "It will return with others," she said grimly, brushing snow from her parka. "We have perhaps 20 Earth minutes." They reached Alara's designated coordinates, a small clearing with a direct line of sight to the stars. She activated her wrist device, which projected holographic controls into the air before her. Jake stood guard, scanning the perimeter as her fingers danced through the light display. "There," she finally said. "The ship will generate multiple energy signatures across a 50-mile radius. It should confuse their tracking systems temporarily." "How temporarily?" 12 hours, perhaps less. Alara closed the projection. "That's all the time we'll have before they triangulate my actual position." As they began their return journey to the cabin, Jake chose a different route, instinctively using terrain features to mask their trail. The snow had providentially stopped, which would make tracking more difficult for their pursuers. "You have military training," Alara observed, following his precise footsteps. "Special Forces. 8 years, 3 deployments." Jake helped her down a steep embankment. "Specialized in hostile extraction." "How fitting," she said with a hint of amusement that surprised him. They had covered half the distance back when Jake froze, raising his fist in the universal military signal to halt. In the distance, lights swept through the trees, not the floating motion of drones, but the methodical movement of ground vehicles. "Your government has been alerted," Alara whispered. The Sentinels would have contacted Earth authorities with a sanitized story, perhaps a meteorite with dangerous radiation, or a terrorist threat. "Black Ops Response Team," Jake muttered, recognizing the search pattern. "I know their protocols. They'll have the cabin surrounded within the hour." He quickly changed direction, leading them toward a rocky area where a small cave system offered potential shelter. As they moved, Jake noticed Alara's pace slowing, her breathing becoming labored. "I need to rest," she finally admitted as they reached the cave entrance. "The stress is affecting us both." Inside the shallow cave, Jake quickly established a minimal camp, using thermal blankets from his pack to create both warmth and a barrier against detection. Alara settled against the rock wall, her silvery blue skin now alarmingly pale. "Tell me the truth," Jake said, crouching beside her. "About why you sought me out specifically." "No more cryptic answers." Alara met his gaze, the star-like points in her eyes shimmering. "During the Qatar incident, what you believe was 3 missing days, your genetic material was harvested. It was meant for study only, but She hesitated. "I was fascinated by its unique properties. Your DNA contains rare adaptive markers. Markers that could help my species overcome genetic stagnation that has plagued us for centuries." Jake's expression hardened. "You used my DNA without consent." "Yes." She didn't flinch from the accusation. "I combined specific sequences with my own genetic code in an experimental procedure. I never expected conception to occur. It was theoretically impossible." The implication hit Jake like a physical blow. "This child is yours, genetically speaking." Alara placed her hand over his, initiating that strange electrical connection again. This time, he didn't pull away. "Not created in the traditional human manner, but your genetic contribution is undeniable." Through their connected hands, Jake felt a surge of emotions, Alara's determination, her fear, but also something else. A presence, small but distinct. "The child." "That's impossible," he whispered, though he couldn't deny what he'd felt. "The child has your adaptive capabilities," Alara explained. "An unexpected psionic potential. That's why the Sentinels want us. The combination of our genetic material has created something beyond either of our species." Outside, the sweep of lights grew closer. Jake withdrew his hand slowly, processing this revelation as he checked the cave entrance. "We need to move soon," he said, his voice tight with conflicting emotions. "There's an old ranger station 10 miles north. We can regroup there, figure out our next move." As he helped Alara to her feet, their eyes met in the darkness. In that moment, something fundamental shifted between them, a connection formed not by choice but by circumstance, yet no less real for its unusual origins. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I never intended to bring this danger to you." Jake adjusted his pack, his expression unreadable. "Too late for that now. Let's focus on surviving the night. We'll figure out the rest later." They slipped out of the cave into the moonlit forest, two fugitives bound by the life growing inside Alara, a life that represented both danger and extraordinary possibility. The abandoned ranger station stood half-hidden among towering pines, its windows dark and shuttered. Jake approached cautiously, rifle ready as he checked for signs of recent occupation. Finding none, he helped Alara inside, quickly securing the perimeter before allowing himself to relax marginally. "It's not much, but it'll keep us hidden for now," he said, brushing dust from a small table. Alara sank gratefully onto a wooden chair, her exhaustion evident. "The child is restless. The journey has been difficult." Jake busied himself gathering materials for a small fire in the stone hearth, hyper-aware of Alara's presence behind him. After the revelation in the cave, a tension hung between them, unaddressed questions about responsibility, connection, and future possibilities. "How far along are you?" he finally asked, striking a match to the kindling. "By your calendar, approximately 7 months. My species' gestation is similar to humans, though the developmental stages differ." She watched the flames grow. "The child will be born within 60 Earth days." Jake's hands stilled. 2 months. The reality of his unexpected fatherhood loomed large in the small cabin. "And then what? You return to your world with our child?" "I cannot return." Alara's voice was heavy with finality. "My actions are considered treasonous. The child would be taken for study, and I would face extraction, the complete removal of my consciousness as punishment." The fire caught properly, casting dancing shadows across the cabin's weathered interior. Jake moved to secure the windows with what materials he could find, processing this information. "So you came to Earth with no plan beyond finding me?" "I came to Earth because it was the only option." Alara's star-filled eyes reflected the firelight. "And I sought you because the child's safety depends on understanding both aspects of its heritage. I cannot provide the human perspective alone." Jake sat across from her, finally asking the question that had been burning since her revelation. Would it be possible for me to sense the child again? Like in the cave?" Alara extended her hand without hesitation. Jake took it, and immediately the electric sensation returned, stronger now, more focused. He gasped as a clear impression formed in his mind: curiosity, warmth, recognition. "The child knows you," Alara whispered, watching his expression with wonder. "Even before birth, the psionic capabilities are developing." "Extraordinary." Jake couldn't find words to describe the feeling coursing through him. He had never considered fatherhood, his military career and subsequent isolation had made such thoughts seem irrelevant. Yet this connection, however bizarre its origins, felt undeniably real. "I need to show you something else," Alara said, guiding his hand to rest directly on her abdomen. The connection intensified immediately, and with it came images, flashes of crystal cities suspended among stars, vast libraries of knowledge stored in living material, the beauty and tragedy of a civilization reaching its evolutionary plateau. "My world," Alara explained as Jake absorbed these impressions. "The child carries genetic memory, another unexpected development. Both are histories, encoded at a cellular level." The intimacy of the moment was interrupted by a faint beeping from Alara's wrist device. She checked it with alarm. "They've triangulated my position faster than anticipated. We have perhaps 2 hours before they converge here." Jake withdrew reluctantly, the loss of connection leaving him disoriented. He moved to the window, checking sight lines and potential escape routes. "We're running out of options," he admitted. "Even if we keep moving, they'll eventually catch up." Elara joined him at the window, her shoulder brushing his. The casual contact sent smaller ripples of that same connection between them. "There is another possibility," she said hesitantly. "My ship contains a prototype stealth module. If properly calibrated, it could mask our biosignatures completely, even from Sentinel technology. We could effectively disappear." "You're talking about going back to the crash site? That's probably their primary target." "Yes, but they won't expect us to return there." Elara's expression was determined. "It's a calculated risk." Jake studied her face. The alien features that had seemed so strange just days ago now felt familiar, even compelling. His gaze dropped to her abdomen, where his child grew, a child that represented an impossible bridge between two species. "Before we do this," he said quietly, "I need to know something. Was I just a convenient genetic donor, or is there more to why you chose me specifically?" The question hung between them, charged with implications neither had fully acknowledged. Elara moved closer, her hand rising to touch his face. The connection sparked immediately, but with a different quality, more personal, layered with emotions that transcended simple biology. "The unauthorized mission to Earth affected more than just you," she whispered. "When I analyzed your genetic material, I experienced echo memories, impressions of your experiences, your emotions. I felt drawn to your resilience, your capacity for compassion despite hardship." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. "I chose your genetic material for scientific reasons, yes. But I sought you out afterward for entirely different ones." The admission hung between them, unspoken possibilities stretching across the space that separated their worlds. Jake found himself leaning toward her, drawn by something beyond rational thought. Their lips met hesitantly at first, then with growing certainty. The contact intensified their mental connection exponentially, creating a feedback loop of sensation and emotion that transcended physical boundaries. Jake felt himself falling into the starlit darkness of her eyes, experiencing the kiss from both perspectives simultaneously. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily, adjusting to the intensity of their shared experience. "That was..." Jake struggled to find words. "Yes," Elara agreed simply, a smile transforming her features. "It was." The moment of connection gave them renewed purpose. As they prepared to make their desperate return to Elara's ship, something had fundamentally changed between them, a partnership forged in extraordinary circumstances, but no less real for its unusual beginnings. Outside, the moon had set, leaving the forest in darkness. It would provide cover for their journey, but also conceal any threats waiting in the shadows. Jake checked his weapons one final time, knowing they offered little protection against what pursued them, yet unwilling to face the night unarmed. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to Elara. She took it, their fingers intertwining naturally now. "Ready." Together, they stepped into the darkness, moving toward an uncertain future that somehow seemed less frightening for being shared. Dawn broke in thin, gray light as Jake and Elara approached the crash site. They had traveled through the night, navigating by stars and Elara's uncanny sense of direction. Both were exhausted, moving on determination alone. "Something's wrong," Jake whispered as they crouched at the forest's edge. The clearing where Elara's ship had landed was now occupied by multiple vehicles, some military, others unmarked black SUVs characteristic of government operations. Personnel in hazmat suits moved methodically around the iridescent purple hull. "They've established a containment perimeter," Elara observed. "But they haven't breached the ship yet. Its defensive protocols are still active." Jake assessed the situation with a soldier's precision. 15 personnel visible. Probably more in the vehicles. 2 sniper positions on the ridgeline. He pointed to barely discernible figures among the rocks. We'll never get through undetected. Ilara's hand moved to her abdomen, a gesture that had become familiar to Jake. We don't need to get through. I only need to establish a direct neural link within 50 meters. And then what? The ship will initiate a targeted electromagnetic pulse, temporarily disabling their equipment. In the confusion, we board and activate the stealth module. Jake raised an eyebrow. That's your plan? An alien EMP and a mad dash? Do you have a better suggestion? There was a hint of challenge in her tone that Jake found surprisingly appealing. Actually, yes. He reached into his pack and removed several small devices. Remote smoke charges. Military grade. I'll place them around the perimeter. When they detonate, you establish your neural link. Between the smoke and your EMP, we might just make it. Ilara studied his face, then nodded. A good plan. But Jake. She hesitated. If we're separated, you must continue to the ship. The child must be protected above all else. The implication wasn't lost on him. That's not happening. We all make it, or none of us do. There was no time to argue further. Jake moved silently through the underbrush, placing the charges at strategic points while avoiding the patrol routes. Years of special operations training guided his movements, a ghost among the trees. When he returned to Ilara's position, her condition had visibly deteriorated. Her silvery blue skin had taken on an alarming pallor, and she was breathing in short, controlled gasps. What's wrong? He asked urgently, kneeling beside her. The child senses danger. It's triggering premature neural development to protect itself. She gripped his hand tightly. We must hurry. Jake activated the detonator. Moments later, dense smoke billowed across the clearing from multiple directions. Confusion erupted as personnel scrambled for gas masks and commanders shouted contradictory orders. Ilara closed her eyes in concentration, her wrist device glowing with increasing intensity. A subsonic pulse rippled through the air, followed immediately by the failure of every electronic device in the clearing. Vehicles stalled, communications died, and the floodlights illuminating the ship went dark. Now! Jake urged, supporting Ilara as they ran toward the vessel. They had covered half the distance when a figure emerged from the smoke directly in their path, a tall, humanoid form in matte black armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Unlike the human personnel, this being moved with unnatural precision. Sentinel Hunter, Ilara gasped, freezing in place. The figure raised an arm, revealing a weapon embedded where a hand should be. Jake reacted instinctively, shoving Ilara aside as energy crackled through the space she had occupied a moment before. Jake fired his rifle, knowing it was likely useless but unwilling to surrender without a fight. The bullet sparked harmlessly against the hunter's armor. It advanced methodically, its featureless helmet turning toward Ilara with single-minded purpose. The ship, Jake shouted to her. Run! Instead, Ilara removed the silver disc device she had shown him earlier and activated it. The hunter stumbled momentarily, its movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. Jake seized the opportunity, tackling the disoriented figure with all his strength. They crashed to the ground together, Jake's combat knife, the only weapon he had that might penetrate the alien armor, already seeking vulnerable joints in the exoskeleton. The hunter recovered quickly, inhuman strength nearly overwhelming Jake's desperate defense. As they grappled, Jake caught glimpses of Ilara making her way toward the ship, one hand steadying herself against trees, the other pressed to her abdomen. The sight gave him renewed determination. The hunter's helmet suddenly retracted, revealing a face disturbingly similar to Ilara's, but with cold, mechanical precision to its movements. It spoke in a language Jake didn't understand, the words like shattered glass in his ears. In that moment of distraction, Jake drove his knife into the exposed neck joint. The hunter convulsed, black fluid seeping from the wound as its systems failed. Jake struggled to his feet, injuries making themselves known now that adrenaline was fading. Through thinning smoke, he saw Alara reach the ship, a doorway materializing in its seamless hull. She turned back, searching for him with obvious desperation. He ran to her, every step an act of will. Behind them, the human forces were regrouping, and in the distance, the distinctive hum of additional Sentinel drones approached. "We need to leave now," Alara said as Jake reached her, pulling him into the ship. The interior was surprisingly spacious, with organic curves and surfaces that seemed to respond to Alara's presence, illuminating as she moved deeper into the vessel. She placed her hands on what appeared to be a living console. The ship hummed to life around them, the entrance sealing seamlessly. Through translucent walls, Jake watched as human forces surrounded the ship, weapons raised ineffectually. "Stealth module activating," Alara announced. The ship's hull began to shimmer, becoming increasingly transparent. "They can still see us, but not for long." Jake moved to her side, supporting her as her strength wavered. "What's happening to you? Tell me the truth. The neural connection with the ship is taxing in my condition." She guided his hand to her abdomen. "Feel." The connection established instantly, stronger than before. The child's presence burned bright in his mind, aware, responsive, and unmistakably afraid. "It's okay," Jake found himself saying, both aloud and through the connection. "You're safe now. Both of you." The ship rose silently, the human forces below firing uselessly as it ascended. The vessel accelerated, breaking through cloud cover into the clear blue above. "Where are we going?" Jake asked, looking out at the earth falling away beneath them. "Not far," Alara assured him, initiating a series of commands. "Low Earth orbit. The stealth module will render us completely undetectable. We can remain here indefinitely while we consider our options." As the curve of the planet came into view, Jake experienced a profound shift in perspective, not just of Earth, but of his place in the universe. 3 days ago, he had been a solitary ex-soldier living in self-imposed exile. Now he stood aboard an alien vessel, bound to its pilot and their unborn child by ties that defied conventional understanding. Alara moved to a chamber at the rear of the ship, which reconfigured itself into something resembling a medical bay. She reclined on the formed surface, visibly relieved as the ship began administering treatment. "The child is stabilizing," she reported after several minutes. "The stress triggered premature neural development, but there's no permanent damage." Jake sat beside her, watching in fascination as the ship's systems worked. "We need to talk about what happens next. For all three of us." Alara turned to face him fully, her star-filled eyes searching his. "I came to Earth with hope but no certainty. I couldn't know if you would help us, much less." She hesitated. "Much less what?" Jake prompted gently. "Form a bond with us." Her hand found his. "My species values genetic compatibility, but we also believe in emotional resonance, connections that transcend physical form. What I feel for you wasn't part of my scientific calculations." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Jake considered his response carefully, aware of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together, yet unable to deny the connection he felt. "I've spent years isolating myself from everyone," he finally said. "Convinced myself it was better that way. Then you literally fell from the sky, carrying a child I never expected to have, and suddenly." He gestured to the vastness of space visible through the ship's translucent hull. "Suddenly everything looks different." He leaned forward, touching his forehead to hers in a gesture that felt instinctively right. The connection bloomed between them, not just physical attraction, but something deeper, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their different origins. "I don't know what this is between us," he admitted. "But I know I want to find out. And I know I want to be a father to our child, however unexpected its beginning. Ilara's smile transformed her alien features, making them suddenly, strikingly beautiful to him. There's a human phrase I encountered in my research. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's found in the most unexpected places. Even across galaxies? Jake asked, returning her smile. Especially then. As Earth rotated beneath them, blue and perfect against the void, they began making plans, not just for survival, but for a future neither could have imagined days earlier. The ship would remain in orbit until the child was born, then establish a permanent base in a remote location where they could live in safety. Ilara began teaching Jake about her world, its language and customs, while he shared the complexities of human society. Together, they prepared for the arrival of a child who would be the first of its kind, a bridge between stars, born of science and circumstance but raised with intentional love. In the quiet moments, when Ilara slept and Jake kept watch over their sanctuary among the stars, he marveled at the journey that had brought him here. A soldier who had lost his way, found again in the vastness of space. A man who had isolated himself from connection, now bound to a family unlike any other. As the ship drifted silently in Earth's orbit, invisible to those below, Jake placed his hand on Ilara's abdomen, feeling the gentle movement of their child. Through their connection, he sensed not fear now, but peace, a small life cradled between two worlds, protected by parents who had crossed the stars to find each other. It was, against all odds, a beginning.